This happened many years ago. I've never liked camping. I'm just not built for it. The dirt, the bugs, the uncomfortable nights in a sleeping bag that somehow always end up feeling like a rock by morning. Unfortunately, I've been camping more times than I can count, though never by choice. My dad is one of those rugged, wilderness-loving types, and every summer when I was a kid, he dragged me out into the woods with his equally rugged friends to disconnect from technology and reconnect with nature. By the time I hit sophomore year of high school, I'd had enough of suffering in silence. I finally convinced him to let me bring a friend along to make the whole thing a little more bearable. To my surprise, he agreed without much fuss. So I brought my friend Charles from school. Now you'd think bringing Charles would have made it worse, considering he was a hardcore Boy Scout back in the day and actually loves camping, but Charles was cool about it. He teased me for hating it, but he wasn't one of those "you're not a real man if you don't love the outdoors" types. Plus, I figured if I had to suffer, at least I'd be suffering with someone who knew how to make a fire and pitch a tent without turning it into a full-blown disaster. He was stoked to come, partly because he loves camping, but also because, back then, he looked for any excuse to get away from his parents. Unfortunately, the trip didn't go as planned from the start. It turned out that one of my dad's friends had messed up the campsite booking. Instead of some remote, peaceful spot deep in the woods, we ended up at this crappy, overdeveloped campsite. I'm talking indoor bathrooms, paved walkways, and even a playground for little kids. It wasn't camping. It was basically glorified backyard living, or glamping, I guess. To say my dad was upset would be an understatement. We didn't even discover the worst part until a few hours later. Right next to the campsite was a mini amusement park. I'm not joking, an actual amusement park with carnival games, a Ferris wheel, and a handful of roller coasters. It's surreal, those two settings were never supposed to collide. An amusement park and a campsite. Everyone was pissed. My dad and his friend grumbled about how this wasn't real camping, and Charles wouldn't shut up about it either. "This isn't real camping," he kept saying, as if I needed the reminder. It started getting annoying because Charles kept making jokes about my family, as if we didn't know what real camping was. Now, as much as I hate camping, I know what it's supposed to look like, so I was getting annoyed that Charles was suggesting otherwise. I told him to knock it off, and he did. The whole situation sucked. We had driven hours out to the site. It wasn't like we could just turn around and leave. So, with no better option, we made the best of it. The grown-ups sulked for a bit, but eventually got to work setting up the camp. And Charles, of course, stepped up like it was time to shine. Within minutes, we had our tent up, all the knots tied perfectly, the rainfly secure, the whole thing staked and taut like it came out of a manual. Even my dad, who never really gave compliments unless someone was bleeding or unconscious, nodded in approval, which got under my skin a bit. Charles and I were sharing a tent, and once everything was set up and dinner was done, we slipped away for a bit under the excuse of organizing our stuff. The truth was, Charles had brought a little metal pipe and some weed in an old Altoids tin. Nothing crazy, just enough to take the edge off. I should mention that Charles and I were in that delinquent phase of life, where we liked causing trouble and hanging around in places we didn't belong. I don't smoke weed anymore, and part of me will always wonder if the only reason I ever did was because I was trying to stick out and defy the norm. Anyway, the two of us snuck into the woods and smoked, chuckling to ourselves the entire time. I don't think either of us were worried about smelling, since we'd probably be avoiding the adults for the rest of the night. We finished our session and made our way back to the tent. After a few hours of just chilling and talking about some of our other friends from school, we both agreed that we had way too much energy to sleep. Charles had a very mischievous grin on his face, and I could only imagine what he was thinking. He suggested we go explore the campsite, and I was skeptical. That is, until I realized he meant explore the amusement park, which instantly piqued my interest. He said it would probably be a piece of cake getting to the top of one of those roller coasters. Climbing stuff was something we loved doing back then, and the thought of climbing a roller coaster was exhilarating. So after we were sure everyone was asleep, we made our move. It was really late by then, well after midnight. We grabbed our flashlights and headed to the fence surrounding the park. It wasn't even that hard to climb, just a little boost from Charles and we were in. The place was dark, but there were security guards patrolling, and every so often, we'd hear the hum of a golf cart making its rounds. It felt like we were in some kind of stealth video game, sneaking around and trying not to get caught. We progressed through the park slowly, ducking behind buildings and keeping an eye on the patrol. At one point, we had to sprint across an open stretch of road to avoid a guard. It was actually really thrilling, but also scary as hell. It's a hard feeling to describe. Everything seemed like a game, but both of us knew the consequences would be harsh if we were caught. We finally made it to the base of the roller coaster, and from up close, it looked way bigger than it had from the campsite. We spotted the maintenance stairs running up alongside the main ascent and didn't hesitate. The metal rungs clanged softly under our feet as we climbed, one step at a time, trying not to make too much noise. There were no railings for part of the stretch, which was actually kind of terrifying. We finally reached the top, and the view was unreal. We could see the entire park below us. We took a single photo up there, as you can see here. I wish we had taken more pictures, but we were being extremely cautious as to not draw attention to ourselves, as we wouldn't be able to get away in time if someone spotted us from below. Eventually, we figured we'd pushed our luck long enough and decided to head back. After making it to the bottom, we started creeping through the park back the way we had come. For whatever reason, the return route was much quicker than the initial one. Maybe the patrol wasn't as intense or something at that hour. I really couldn't tell you. We were maybe 5 minutes from the spot we'd hopped the fence when we had to stop. One of the guards was making a round in a golf cart, so we had to quickly duck behind a snack shack and wait for them to pass. That's when I noticed something move in the dark. At first I thought maybe I imagined it, or maybe it was a shadow from the golf cart's headlights bouncing off something weird. But then Charles tapped my arm and pointed in the same direction. I focused my gaze a bit more and confirmed it. About 30 feet away, just barely visible in the darkness between two buildings, was another person. They were crouching down just like us, like they were also sneaking around and trying to avoid the guards. It didn't look like a kid though. The worst part about it was that I was fairly confident they were looking directly at us. At this point, we were actually kind of scared. Between the patrolling guards and now this, the situation was getting a little overwhelming. As much as we wanted to, we still couldn't move. The guards still hadn't passed yet. I kept my eyes glued to the figure, and they actually started moving. They darted across a patch of open ground and right through the little spill of light coming from a nearby street lamp. For a split second, I saw him clearly. It was a man like I suspected. He was wearing tattered clothing and had this really awkward stride like he was injured or disfigured. But none of that was as unsettling as the dark liquid smeared across his face. It looked like blood. Charles saw it too, and the two of us exchanged a really terrified look. Eventually the man ducked out of sight. The guard finally passed us, and we kept moving. We didn't say a word as we made our way back to the fence. I kept checking over my shoulder every few seconds, convinced we were being followed, but no one was there. We made it back to the fence, scaled it the same way we came in, and dropped down on the other side. The difference was, this time we didn't laugh about it. All I wanted was to be back in the safe confines of our tent. I could tell Charles was thinking the same thing. By the time we made it back to our tent, neither of us brought up sleeping. We just lay there in our sleeping bags trying to make sense of what we'd seen. The best we could come up with was that it was some homeless guy doing God knows what. A stupid explanation, I know, but we couldn't think of anything else. The next morning started off normally. We got up, had a bite to eat, and started packing our gear to go fishing. But around 10 a.m., one of the camp staffers came around to our tent site and gave us an announcement that the whole campsite was supposed to hear. Apparently, a man had been stabbed and killed the night before at a lake about 4 miles away from the campground. They weren't giving many details, but the guy who did it was still on the loose, and the local sheriff's office had asked all park rangers and campsite staff within a certain mile radius to be on high alert. They described him as a disheveled white male in his late 30s, shirtless, possibly bleeding, or with blood on his clothes. Then they instructed us to pack our things and leave for our own safety. Charles and I instantly connected the dots. It must have been that guy we had seen the night before. We kept our mouths shut. We didn't tell my dad. We didn't tell the rangers, and I still don't really know why. I know I'm gonna get a bunch of hate for this, and I get it, but at that age, I was more convinced with staying out of trouble than anything else. I still kick myself for not speaking up. My statement could have led to the capture of a dangerous person who may have gone on to commit more crime. I'm still close with Charles. We went to the same college, graduated together, and work in similar fields. This experience is something we don't often talk about, though. If I'm being honest, I think Charles feels much more guilty about not speaking up than I do. Mistakes and regret aside, though, I think it's crazy that my friend and I were mere feet away from a murderer on the run. I don't like thinking about what could have happened had we crossed paths that night. This happened back in October of 2016. right when that weird clown hysteria was all over the news. People were posting creepy clown sightings across the country. Most of them were obviously hoaxes or people just trying to get attention. But as you know, there were a couple true cases that were downright terrifying. What happened to me was one of them. I was 16, a junior in high school. I had just finished 7th period, and after saying goodbye to all my friends, I hopped on the 6 train heading uptown. The train was mostly empty, which was kind of unusual but not unheard of. I wasn't being very attentive to my surroundings. I had my headphones in and I was blasting music. Drake probably. To make matters worse, I was reviewing chem flashcards on my phone, so I was about as unaware as humanly possible. Never a good idea when traveling alone, but I knew the area well enough to know I'd probably be fine. I was planning to get off at 96th, then walk home from there. Nothing unusual, just a regular Wednesday. But things went downhill really fast. We arrived at 96th, and I jumped out of my seat instinctively, barely even looking up to make sure it was the right station. That train ride was something I had done so many times that the routine had become second nature. Getting on and off was like a reflex. With my head still buried in my phone, and my music still blasting in my ears, I made my way over to the doors. But as soon as they slid open, I realized out of the edge of my vision that something was obstructing my path. I looked up and realized some guy had stepped directly into the doorway, only it wasn't a normal person. It was a clown. He was wearing the full getup, oversized rainbow pants, a baggy yellow shirt with red suspenders, giant red shoes, and this exaggerated white makeup smeared across his face. Red nose, blue eyebrows, the whole cartoon nightmare. The only thing missing was the wig. I was literally frozen in shock at the sight of him. Not only was I caught completely off guard, but until then, I had never been in such close proximity to something so bizarre. He didn't say anything, he just stood there, not trying to get on the train, but clearly preventing me from getting off. I snapped out of my haze and realized I had a good 5 seconds before the doors would close, so I had to do something. I tried to brush past him, but the literal moment I made contact with him, he leaned down in one fluid motion like he was trying to make sure we were face to face. Before he could grab or restrain me, I sprinted past him, and that's when he lurched forward in an attempt to tackle me. I dodged him and continued running, and he started chasing me. It was terrifying. There was no one else around, and I was being chased by a killer clown. The 96th Street station is relatively quiet in the early afternoon, so I was essentially on my own. I shot a glance behind me and saw him pursuing me, only his stride wasn't normal. He was running with this jerky motion like his limbs were disproportionate, but I was much more focused on what was now in his hand. It was what looked like a kitchen knife. I didn't know where he had been hiding it or what his intentions were, but I didn't care. I ran up the stairs and out of the station and immediately reported the situation to the police. He didn't follow me onto the street, but I was still pretty shaken up. The police sent someone down to the station, but he was gone by then. Even after talking to the police and being reassured that I was safe, I couldn't get the irrational thought out of my head that he somehow knew where I lived and was going to track me down later. But that obviously didn't happen. In fact, nothing else ever happened at all. I wouldn't be surprised if my story ended up on the news as one of the many strange clown encounters of 2016, although I can't say for sure. It took me a few weeks to fully get over this experience. This isn't your typical scary story, but I promise it's worth a listen. I was 2 years out of undergrad when the whole thing started. While I was technically getting an online graduate certificate at the same school I had obtained my bachelor's at, I still had a ton of free time on my hands. During that period of my life, I was jumping around from odd job to odd job, looking for any old gig to fill the hours and help me stack some cash. Let's just say Indeed was my best friend at the time. I honestly found 90% of my leads from that one website alone. I was getting tired of door dashing around the same 6 neighborhoods for minimum wage, so I decided a change of pace was in order. As I was browsing Indeed later that night, I stumbled upon something intriguing. It was a private lifeguarding job at a hotel a few towns over. I know that doesn't sound that abnormal by itself, but there were a couple of strange details in that listing that gave me pause. First of all, the hours were backward, like they weren't normal pool hours. You'd expect a typical hotel pool to open sometime in the morning and close sometime in the evening, with maybe a few hours of downtime in the middle of the day, right? Well, this was the opposite, damn near exactly. They wanted someone to operate and supervise a swimming pool from 5 p.m. to 1 a.m. during the week. It was basically a night shift for a pool. That wasn't the strangest thing though. The requirements explicitly requested an individual who didn't speak Spanish. Let me repeat that. They specifically wanted someone who didn't speak Spanish. Here was the problem. I've been speaking Spanish since I was a little kid. I'm literally half Mexican. The town the hotel was based in was predominantly populated by Spanish-speaking Americans too, so that requirement didn't make much sense to me. In fact, nothing about the listing made sense to me. I remember being beyond perplexed when combing through it. There was one thing I was feeling pretty good about though. $30 an hour, which would probably be something like $50 in today's inflation-adjusted economy. I don't really know if that's true, but the point is, $30 an hour back then was like stubbing your toe on a gold bar. Safe to say, I disregarded all the other nonsense and decided to focus my attention on the compensation. I decided that I'd just pretend not to know Spanish. What were they gonna do? The gig must have been either brand new or in really low demand, because I heard back and was actually invited to interview within a few hours. Fast forward to the first day, I pull up to the hotel, and everything looks exactly how you'd expect. This pudgy Mexican-looking dude comes out to greet me, and the two of us exchange information and have a laugh. He was actually really friendly and pretty funny too, and his amiable demeanor put me at ease a little. But as we were walking into the complex, this other, taller guy turned a corner and started staring me down. I could tell right away that I was being profiled, and I started wondering whether having the first person to greet me behave so unimposingly was a ploy to get me to lower my guard. The second guy walked right up to me and started communicating with me in Spanish. He didn't smile, didn't say hello, shake my hand, nothing. I instantly knew what he was doing. He was trying to gauge whether or not I knew Spanish, so the listing hadn't been BS. I gave him a blank stare, even though I understood every word. He wasn't saying anything crazy, by the way. He was just rambling about the weather or something. It wasn't important enough to remember. After a few seconds, I turned to the first guy, who turned to the taller guy, and then the two of them burst out laughing, like they had both been in on some practical joke. The taller guy flashed a smile, outstretched his hand, and said he was just messing with me. I went along with it, but I was a little weirded out. He introduced himself as Jefe, and the bigger guy as Esteban. The three of us walked through the complex to get to the pool, and the taller guy, who I assumed was the one in charge, started talking me through the job. According to him, they needed someone to work later hours because they wanted to increase revenue, and they were going to start charging non-guests just to use the pool. I didn't even know if that was legal, but I wasn't about to start complaining. I was told they wanted someone who didn't speak Spanish because it would prevent rowdy outsiders from trying to harass me, which I didn't fully understand, but went along with it anyway. My responsibilities were as follows. Lifeguard, obviously, collect money from non-guests trying to enter the pool, and call Jefe if there was any sort of problem. And there was one more thing. Jefe told me that if anyone showed me a blue wristband, I was to let them into what he called the pool house, which was a huge building behind the lifeguard stand. I didn't ask questions. The first week was really chill. The first few weeks, actually. A lot more people used the pool than I was expecting, so I had my work cut out for me. I collected money from outsiders and kept an eye out. No one showed me a wristband. The first time someone did show me a wristband was about a month in. On some random day, this buff Hispanic guy in shades and a white button-down shirt walked up to me, clearly not knowing a lick of English. He showed me his wristband, and I unlocked the pool house. About an hour later, he emerged and began walking towards the exit gate. The pool house door locked automatically, so I didn't have to interact with him or get down again, but I watched him leave. His backpack looked significantly more full than it had when he arrived, but other than that, everything was normal. Over the next few weeks, more and more people started showing me wristbands, and a lot of them started showing up together. More and more non-guests started using the pool too, because I began collecting a lot more money than I ever had. At one point, I realized I was actually collecting too much money, like people entering the pool would overpay me by a crazy amount on a consistent basis. I called Jefe about it, and he told me not to worry, saying that people made mistakes all the time. I could tell he didn't want to talk about it more than he had to, because he hung up the phone while I was mid-sentence. Amidst everything fishy that was going on, that short, harmless phone call confirmed to me that I was involved in something more than just lifeguarding a swimming pool. Only after hanging up the phone did the true gravity of the situation hit me. My mind started smothering all the noise until there was a single thought I couldn't purge from my brain. Money laundering. I didn't know what to do. On the one hand, my intuition was telling me I was involved in something illegal and should get out of there immediately, but on the other hand, I had no safe way of confirming that suspicion and didn't want to forfeit $30 an hour over nothing, so I kept my mouth shut and kept the job. After that moment, though, I started piecing everything together. The pool house, or the building I'd been told was a pool house, was clearly where the shady stuff went on. Illegal gambling, drug trafficking, something worse, whatever it was happening right behind me every single day, obstructed from view by only a single locked door. Patrons of the pool started getting more friendly with me, especially the wristband wearers. Strangers began learning my name, and I went from solely collecting money to collecting tips, high fives, and greetings too. As people got more comfortable with me, they started talking in front of me. I catch pieces of their conversation in Spanish, and let's just say all my suspicions were confirmed. Admittedly, the added benefits made overlooking everything else much easier. Plus, my hands were clean. I was being employed to perform a job, which was exactly what I was doing. Speaking of the job, I actually had to rescue a drowning child a few days later. It wasn't anything overly heroic, just a kid who strayed too far into the deep and clearly couldn't swim. But when I returned to the surface of the pool, everyone gave me a standing ovation. It was a really unique feeling. After that, Hefe actually came down from wherever in the hotel he had been and thanked me personally for doing such a good job lifeguarding. He said he owed me his life, which I didn't understand until I realized the kid I saved was actually his son. The next day, Hefe, Esteban, and a bunch of other dudes, some of whom I recognized as wristband wearers, were all waiting at the gate to greet me with a glass of wine. That obviously felt great, but the good feeling didn't last. After everyone toasted me, one of the men made a toast in Spanish. I don't remember what was said verbatim, but it was not a pleasant speech. He was basically toasting all the money they were making and all the, quote, lives they were destroying, whatever that meant. Everyone laughed and drank, but that was the moment that made me realize I had gotten addicted to something seriously insidious. No amount of money and tips should have justified me staying at that hotel that long, and yet, regrettably, I had. The next day, my mom called me while I was at the pool. I'm not going to get into it, but my mom, rest her soul, never called me unless it was something really important, so I had to answer. I got down from my stand and went over to what I thought was a private little alcove so I could have some privacy. My mom only ever spoke Spanish, so naturally I had to talk to her in Spanish. I don't remember what she called me about. What I do remember is that after hanging up and turning to head back to the pool, Esteban was standing directly in my path, staring at me. He did not look like that same friendly guy I had met on my first day at the pool. After a really awkward pause, he asked how long I knew Spanish. I played dumb, saying I was just practicing it with a friend and wanted to learn, but I knew he saw right through me. He just kept staring at me like he was contemplating something. My heart started racing, and I felt like he was debating whether or not to harm me. Eventually, he just said, okay, and turned around, and I immediately went right back to my post. I debated leaving, but couldn't force myself out of the chair. They might have taken that as a sign of guilt. I could have been failing a test. They probably knew where I lived. Those were all thoughts racing through my mind as I prayed for my life, frozen to that chair. A few minutes before my shift ended, Hefe came up to me and told me to arrive an hour early the following day, as he'd have a new opportunity to offer me. Then he tipped me a couple $100 and walked back into the hotel. When I left the hotel that day, I never returned. No way. That situation had no good ending. I don't think I was ever followed home, but for months after that, I was a paranoid wreck. Every van or suspicious-looking car on my street freaked me out, and there were nights where I just stayed awake for hours, thinking about the situation. Even after all these years, there are things about it I don't understand. They were obviously moving drugs, I get that, but why they'd even need me at all was something I never understood. My best guess was that they just needed someone on payroll who could act like a clueless employee if the cops ever stopped by. Who knows? I still think I was really close to losing my life that day, as unlikely as that may seem to anyone hearing this. But I'm telling you, the way Esteban was glaring at me, there was one thing on his mind, and one thing only.